I love Japan. I love the history, the music, the culture, and I love anime. And for many like myself who come from other parts of the world like the United States, Japan can seem mystical and enticing. However, recently I've taken note of many throughout the anime community having this really weird obsession with Japan almost purely because of anime and manga, not because of actual interest in Japan or knowledge of Japanese history and culture. So in this video, I'm going to cover some taboo history and developments you probably haven't heard about regarding Japan. If you don't learn anything new at all by the end of this video, feel free to leave a dislike because I didn't do my job. If you take a look at Japan's history, they haven't even had 200 years of global involvement. Japan was first brought into the international scope in 1853 when Matthew Perry of the US Navy forced them to open up trade with the United States and officially ended Japan's isolation. This was 1853 when Japan finally began its rise out of feudalism and the age of the samurai. And Japan wouldn't instantly become a drastically liberalized modern nation. Instead, in 1868, Japan formed an empire which would prove to uphold many, if not all, old cultural traditions from the isolationist eras. The Japanese Empire quickly rushed to modernize Japan and catch them up with Western powers. However, the Japanese Empire would not be a democracy or a benevolent republic. Instead, the empire formed into a fascist, ethnocentric, militaristic, and imperialistic state that would invade and subjugate Korea, Manchuria, much of Southeast Asia, and eventually even mainland China. The Japanese Empire aligned themselves with the Axis powers in World War II and committed massive atrocities on the same level, if not worse, than the Nazi Holocaust. For example, when Japan invaded the Chinese city of Nanking in 1937, at that time the capital of China, they would slaughter 300,000 Chinese citizens, rape 30,000 to 80,000 Chinese women, and commit atrocities so terrible I can't even talk about them in this video. The Nazis who were present in China at the time would even themselves be disgusted by the display. One Nazi loyalist by the name of John Raab would even have to himself stop the Japanese from raping, torturing, and burying alive multitudes of innocent people. This event would go on to be called the Nanking Massacre or Rape of Nanking. The Japanese Imperial Army had the worst prisoner of war record of any combatants in World War II, and many prisoners of war were beaten to death, experimented on, or forced to march to their deaths, such as is the case of the Bataan Death March, which killed up to 18,000 prisoners of war. But that's not even close to the worst actions that the Japanese Empire would take. The Japanese Empire also participated in Unit 731, which was a biological and chemical weaponry development that conducted inhumane human experiments on a mass scale and would kill up to 500,000 people. The Japanese Empire would test chemical and biological weapons on Chinese cities and towns, which resulted in many deaths. But on top of this, Unit 731 would conduct dissections and experiments on men, women, infants, and children in prisoner of war camps. These experiments would be done while the prisoners were still alive, involving no anesthetic, which would slowly kill the prisoners. The Japanese removed prisoners' limbs and organs, injected them with diseases such as dysentery and typhoid fever, and often reattached limbs on the opposite side of the body to see the effects. Many Japanese doctors who participated in Unit 731, such as Ken Yuasa, would claim that these experiments were not just limited to Unit 731, instead occurring all throughout the Japanese Imperial Army. After the war, when Ken Yuasa would speak about the atrocities he and Japan committed during Unit 731, he would be silenced and threatened by Japanese nationalists who didn't want the public discovering these atrocities. Of course, this led to another problem, that is the complete deletion of these instances from Japanese schools and textbooks, so no Japanese students are learning about these atrocities committed by their own country less than 100 years ago. And on top of this, public schools around the world, including the United States, also forget to teach these atrocities in favor of focusing on the Nazi Holocaust. This gives a skewed viewpoint of history and allowed Japan to peddle away many of the crimes they committed before and during World War II, which we will talk about in a second. Total deaths caused by Japanese war crimes and crimes against humanity number anywhere from 3 to 14 million. And I bring this history up not to attack Japan or make them out to be evil, as I have massive respect and admiration for the modern state of Japan and their people, but ignoring and censoring history is not what we do on this YouTube channel. It's very important for anime fans or anyone with an uneducated perspective of Japan to learn about how Japan and almost any developed country existent today is not free of atrocious acts. This includes my own country, the United States, along with my own ancestors, Germany, the United Kingdom, China, Russia, and countless others. The modern state of Japan has done some to repent for their past mistakes, including the complete abolition of their military and establishment of a constitutional monarchy, as well as owning up and apologizing for their war crimes. I also wanted to make the distinction that the past actions of the Empire of Japan have little to do with today's Japan or their people. However, through a bit of research, I learned that Japan is still riddled with residual effects from the oppressive Japanese Empire. Japan has been ruled by a singular political party since the establishment of their democracy, the Liberal Democratic Party. This Liberal Democratic Party holds nationalist viewpoints, and many of their founding members were the same people who advocated for the invasion of China, the pardon of many Japanese war criminals, and plenty of their members today hold much esteem for the Empire of Japan. Some even joining ultra-nationalist group Nippon Kaigi, who wishes to revise the Japanese constitution to allow a standing military and preserve the monarchy. Nippon Kaigi, its members, and many Japanese refuse to acknowledge the war crimes committed by the Japanese Empire, instead claiming they are dramatized to push an agenda. The best way I have heard this development put is German soldiers returned home after World War II as criminals and were put on trial at Nuremberg, whereas Japanese soldiers came back to their homeland as heroes to the population, regardless of the atrocities committed. The current Prime Minister of Japan, Yoshihide Suga, is himself a member of Nippon Kaigi. And of course, the monarchy still exists in Japan. Even after all the atrocities committed by the royal family, the emperor still rules as a ceremonial leader. Although it is important to remember, the royal family is crucial to Japan and is the oldest hereditary monarchy in human history. You probably see how all this could be an issue for democracy in Japan, and you can also probably imagine the massive amount of influence this has had on Japanese culture and society. The thing is, the Japanese populace has continuously, fairly, and freely elected the Liberal Democratic Party, so obviously in the minds of the Japanese people, the Liberal Democratic Party is doing good for their interest. This could be because they are used to the Liberal Democratic Party being in power, or they like their policy. Either way, I am not an expert on the Japanese electoral process. I just wanted to raise awareness on how the Liberal Democratic Party and Nippon Kaigi could potentially become a huge issue for Japan. As we have seen the Japanese economy flatline in the last 20 years with a sharp decrease in population, it is uncertain whether or not Japan will rewrite their political system or continue with a political legacy that leads back to the Japanese Empire. Before I end this video, I just want to say I am by no means an expert on Japan and would encourage you to do your own research on these topics if you are interested. Thank you for watching. Please remember to leave a like and maybe even subscribe, and I will see you in the next one. Sayonara.